Executive Director of City Startup Labs. We've been in the business of developing entrepreneurial talent and capacity here in Charlotte with what we would call the turf folk, right? Traditionally underrepresented founders, right? We started off working with young Black men in particular, went co-ed, and we've been more recently working with justice-involved or formerly incarcerated persons as a population. We also just recently acquired Black Tech Interactive so that we could build a startup studio that is tech-focused and also convene Black tech talent. But enough about me. I want to introduce our illustrious panel here, two lovely young ladies, and I'll start directly to my right. This would be Dr. Shante Williams. And Shante, would you please introduce yourself? And also, while you introduce yourself, also tell us about your why. Why did you start the business that you are running? Thank you.
Is it still morning? Good morning. Dr. Shante Williams. I'm the global CEO of Black Pearl Global Investments. It is an asset management firm headquartered here in Charlotte, North Carolina, with offices in Kingston, Jamaica, and Accra, Ghana. Why did I start Black Pearl? I don't know. I think I'm a little bit crazy at this point with where we are. But a big reason why we started Black Pearl along the way, as a former healthcare provider, we really wanted to see healthcare disparities reduced. But we also wanted to see funds go into companies that did that work, but we wanted to see those funds go into and get into the hands of the people who could do the most good. Anyone who's ever heard me speak knows that I call myself a capital activist. I don't call myself a venture capitalist. What is a capital activist? It's someone who does that work, meaning we get the funds into the hands of the people who can do the most good. When we think about funding and investment, money's a tool. Money's a tool that can build or destroy. At the end of the day, I don't call myself a social investor. I don't really believe that we have to decouple social impact from investment. I'm a capitalist at heart, meaning I do believe in high yield returns. Black Pearl does high yield investment. We have a private equity division. We have a venture capital division. Those returns that we are looking to make do come via Black and brown hands. They come at the hands of women. They come at the hands of people who are working in Africa, in the Caribbean, in South America, and right here in rural United States, in Charlotte, North Carolina, outside of Silicon Valley. Why? Because we're getting the money into their hands. That's what Black Pearl does. All four of our founders, people of color. That is unique. That's what Black Pearl does. That's why we started the company. I can say as someone who is the 50 out of 50, if you're from Charlotte, you know what that means. That means you're a person that was born into poverty, who was said that you would not transcend poverty. That was not my story. I do what I do because I do believe that doesn't have to be anybody's story. At the end of the day, some of you are pitching, some of you are investing. We should use our capital, social or financial, in a way that makes sense. Our bias, we all have them, myself included, can be set aside. And before I get too far into my spiel, I'll turn it over to Kim.
Thank you, Shante. Can you all hear me? My name is Kim Banham. I'm a partner at Kinetic Ventures. We are an early stage VC firm in Kentucky, right across the river from Cincinnati. So if any of you have flown into Cincinnati, you actually land in Kentucky. So some people are very confused by that. But being a early stage VC firm in Kentucky, yes, there are companies there, but as Shantae was saying, we're looking to deploy capital into founders all over the US. We do not invest in San Francisco or Boston, and that is solely because there's lots of funding in those cities. So if you're coming to a VC firm in Kentucky, probably means you're not the best company to fund, but we built a machine learning AI platform. As we talk about bias, it's hard for all of us. We all have some sort of bias. So we have every company go through the same application process where we are using data and taking a data-driven approach to investments versus investing off of our gut. So while I'm sitting up here on this panel, there could be 100 companies applying for funding, and by taking a data-driven approach, we are able to look through and analyze which companies would be most likely to get a check from Kinetic. And as I said, we do early stage, and one of the unique things we do is a personality assessment that we built in-house. Is founders here or investors, everyone always talks about the team, the team, the team, the team. But how are we all wired? The three of us on stage here are probably different. Some of us may have similar work styles or characteristics. And as an investor, you'll see a lot of times a technical founder, they love building out new features and aspects to a software company, and they gravitate towards sometimes other developers or coders, which we believe diversity is people with different personality types make a team grow much quicker than three people. If the three of us on this panel think similarly and somebody else sitting in the audience has a different thought, bringing those ideas to a table and funding those founders with very diverse personality types makes a company grow and scale much quicker. And as you know, as an investor, we are in this, like you said, we want returns. We're not doing this for the good, but we do want to give funding to minorities and women and people of color that are not getting the same amount of funding. In our current fund, 62% of our portfolio companies are actually female minority founders. We're not setting out to invest in more females or minorities. This is by treating everyone equal and asking the same questions. So it's organically happened that our portfolio is funding more women and minorities, which is not the case for when you look at the VC dollars going to these founders. So happy to discuss more on this panel, and thank you for having us.
Well, you both touched upon your investment theses, if you will. Can you unpack that a little more and how that either aligns with, and I don't think that it does, but how it may counter what we find typically within the VC or PE world, what those investment theses might look like. And specifically, we're talking about, and I had to really ask this question: what is TURF? Is TURF an acronym, or are we talking about the turf that is occupied by Black founders and female founders? But it is in fact that. So let's hear a little more about your investment theses, if you would.
So as I said, our theses, we come in at an early stage, and as we're looking at TURF and how do we fund these founders, as we sit and see the companies that are here pitching as an investor or founders, we love the extroverted, very well presented, put together founder that is pitching, and you practice that pitch over and over. But what is important is, are you wired and able to actually lead that company and make decisions where, as we said, bringing diversity to a team, having, as we talk about how do you get funding for females and minorities, and I think it's really important when you are looking for funding and you have a company, diversify your team as well. Like I don't want 4 women that look like me at my team. I want to bring a male. I want to bring a person of color, because you have different ways of thinking. And, you know, some of the things Shantae spoke about earlier, the 50, was it the 50-50?
50 out of 50.
50 out of 50. You know, I'm not aware of that. This is something that brings a different perspective to a table. And I think it's really important to be aware as investors to make sure we are giving funding to people that are not getting the dollars like the white males receive over 90% of all VC dollars. And we need to be aware and make a change to that current problem we have going on here in our country.
Real quickly, the 50 out of 50 that Shantae was speaking to refers to a Raj Chetty study. When Raj Chetty was at Harvard, he did a study looking at socioeconomic mobility around the country. And Charlotte had the dubious distinction of being ranked 50 amongst the top 50 markets in terms of socioeconomic mobility. And interestingly enough, Mecklenburg County, where Charlotte is occupies, it was ranked 99th out of 100, right? And here we are in Banktown, so, you know, go figure. Anyway, Dr. Shantae, tell us about your investment theses.
Well, I always like to start with this fun fact. I actually don't have a minority investment thesis, which shocks the hell out of most people. Yes, I am a Black female that runs an investment fund, and I don't only invest in minority founders. No, because I am interested in investing in good ideas. Yes, that's what we do. So first, our investment thesis is centered around solving health disparities. Now, similar to Kim, who is looking at eliminating bias out of the system, we tend to look at the concept, and for us, we say there are 3 things that we are looking for. Does it improve outcome? Does it reduce cost? And does it increase access? Now, when we look at the founding team, if it's white male, for example, do they also have women? Are they geographically diverse? Are they solving a problem that is different? Who are they reaching? Are they answering those problems? And I think that in and of itself is how we are answering the questions differently. And for whatever reason, this is where things become very complicated when you are a owner of an investment fund, and I run 2 different funds. I have a different fund called Equilibrium that does have an investment thesis that is very underrepresented founder specific. So that investment thesis is centered around the founder, where a third of our investments will go to women specifically. A third of those investments will go to people of color specifically. And then the other third will be opportunistic, but can also go to women or a Black and brown founder specifically. But Black Pearl doesn't have that mandate baked into our investment funds. So for us at Black Pearl, we're really centered around problems that will be solving health disparities. So when we look at whether or not the problem the team is solving, the way you think about the problem you're solving. For example, if you are developing a healthcare technology, let's say you have a skin technology that is screening for cancer, but you never once tested it on a person with dark skin. Guess what? You're not going to be a target for us. Why? Because you just built something that's not going to be usable for a very large demographic. That's the kind of investment we won't make. I'm going to look at your data and say, hey, you're missing a whole swath of people in the world that get skin cancer. That's how we keep from putting our dollars behind technologies that discriminate against Black and brown people, for example. So for us, even when we put our dollars into companies that may not have a diverse team, we will say, hey, you need a woman on your tech team. That's how we eliminate some of that bias there. And then we say, we are not going to put our dollars in if your tech team isn't rounded out. We're not going to put our dollars in if you're not building this technology and expanding your data set. That this isn't an investment for us. So even within our investment thesis that doesn't have requirements or restrictions about who will put our dollars behind, as a former practitioner, and then my partner, Dr. Carl Smart, who also is a pulmonary surgeon, we are looking at your data sets. We're making sure that we aren't just continuing to perpetuate the problems in healthcare by putting technologies out there that aren't going to work for people across the globe.
Great, thank you, thank you. I ran across a set of fun facts that I want to share with you it was from a survey by OpenVC. And they found that there were 4 primary conclusions regarding investment theses. Number 1, public theses are often inconsistent with how firms actually deploy capital. Now, we're not saying that in the case of these 2 ladies here, but this is just a general survey that they did with VCs, right? VC theses are often so vague that they're meaningless. We found that 7 categories of VC theses plus an 8th, the non-theses, right? And then 4 investment theses are just hypotheses. The portfolio shows how accurate the hypothesis was. So I don't know what that means in terms of debunking theses or not, but I just figured that we would toss that out there. So another question for you, ladies.
Well, can I just say this as a tip to all of the people raising money? If you ever want to know what a fund actually invests in, just look at their portfolio page. Don't read their thesis or this is what we invest in. It is crap. Go to their portfolio page.
There you go.
Their portfolio page will tell you what they invest in and at what phase, how much money they deploy, because that part is their dream. That's their ideal. It's like your dating profile, right? That's your ideal. If you want to see actually who people really date, go look at their exes, right? If you want to see where people actually invest, look at their portfolio page. That'll tell you actually where they invest. That will save you a lot of heartache at the end of the day.
Right, kind of like mission statements as well, right?
I want to also touch on what
sure.
we were talking prior to this panel, and what I see a lot as a partner, and as Shantae said, go to any investor's website and you'll see the companies we're investing in. But a problem that I personally see is these funds that are popping up that are just investing in people of color or just investing in females. Because what happens is there's a $1 billion fund and a large VC has now said, we're going to do a $50 million fund in female founders. Mm-hmm. So what happens in this room, all the females get sent to that $50 million fund versus the $1 billion fund. So we're not helping the problem that's going on, we're actually making it worse, which we discussed. We should all be treated the same and give the funding to the founders that are going to make a difference regardless of, race, gender, and it's growing and starting innovative companies that are going to disrupt current marketplaces or technology that's going to make things easier, better, and cheaper for all of us. So I think it's important to be aware that when, as a firm, if your company's not a fit and you happen to be a female or a minority, to move away from sending you to those funds that just invest, because it's creating the same bias, because it's not treating everyone equal.
Yeah. You mentioned portfolio, so give us a sort of a profile of the portfolio, your investment portfolios. Just in terms of categories, not necessarily specific
So we
businesses.
invest in all industries except for healthcare for the most part, so very different, but we're open. Obviously, software is very different than a CPG product, so there's multiples that we're looking at that are very different for a CPG product versus a fintech or insurtech, which most of the companies here are, for what a valuation would be. So we are open to pretty much all industries with the exception of healthcare. And as I said, our process is the same for every founder in this room. I'm not going to ask individual questions or take a call. We use the machine learning and the data to decide if it's a fit for what we're looking for. Some companies may be too early for Kinetic, which if the team and the concept is a fit for us, it would be come back to us in your next funding round. We've funded many companies. We have 100 companies in our portfolio, so we're able to move quickly and make an investment. And if it's something that we see a fit for us, it may be your next funding round. Sometimes it's not the right team in place and people make changes. And so our portfolio is very diverse in industry sectors and founders.
Yeah, so I pick up everything she doesn't, which is healthcare. So healthcare, not pharmaceuticals though. So I think that's my line. And we will do idea up to Series A. I don't have 100 companies in my portfolio. We've only been investing actively for 2 years. And we have a US-based fund, and starting in January, we will start investing actively in companies on the continent of Africa. So we will be expanding our portfolio soon enough with 4 investments on the continent in January. But healthcare, expanding into green tech. Yeah, so healthcare, everything she doesn't essentially do is me.
But don't you have consumer products as well?
So we do have a contact lens company. So we are the only, so contact lenses actually are medical devices. So it's still healthcare. But we are the only contact lens manufacturer that is Black owned / woman owned in the world, which is no small feat. It is a part of our portfolio. We acquired 3 months ago. It's a part of our private equity portfolio. We will actually acquire a second contact lens manufacturer probably in another couple of months, but it will be ex-US. But that sits a little bit aside from the VC. It's in our private equity portfolio. And it straddles, I guess, medical and consumer goods. The difference between the two really is size and scale. One has significantly more employees and operates a little bit differently. But yes, under that company head, we also do some venture investing out of that company, which is a little weird. If anybody ever wants to be bored to death, I can explain that. But if you have eye and ophthalmology companies, I think there is one in the Venture 135 program that we've already connected with. But if there are other opportunities there, we can make investments out inside of that company. So connect there.
There you go. So answer this question, if you would. Why does it make sense for more representation of women and minorities, and African Americans in particular, among investment professionals and firms, as well as with deal flow, right? So you two are outliers, relatively speaking. But if you were to be working with one of the more significant VC firms or private equity firms, we see very few women, very few people of color. Why do you think it's important? I know you've touched upon that, you've kind of skirted around that, but let's dig in. Why is that important? Why is representation important?
Well, I mean, as we've all discussed on this panel, it's different thoughts that are coming to the table, and that's what is going to bring success to a company. So as you're building out an advisory board, you want to bring different mindsets to the table because it's going to be a value add. As Shantae said, if you're developing a screener and you have not tested this on brown people, this is not something that I personally have experienced, but she's going to bring this, oh, I didn't think of it from that standpoint. So we're seeing things from a different lens. As she talks about contact lenses, it's very important to be able to step back. And as an investor, it is very few women are in this space, as Shantae had said, and especially her being a Black female investor, she gets a lot of organic deal flow. But her thoughts, my thoughts, everyone in this room, it's very important that we are intentionally diversifying a board or a company, because that is how you're going to see success, when you're bringing different thoughts and ideas to a company and to a table.
So most people who know me know I can be an emotional person, but I don't make emotional arguments. I'm a quantitative person. And every study shows that when we'll take women, for example, when we invest in women, whole communities thrive. The whole community does better. When banks lend to women, the entire community economically does better. When we, for example, I'll take a micro-lending study that was done in rural communities. When banks gave women small loans to support their families, not just that one family did better. The entire community actually economically did better. Why? Because that woman helped her family, and then that family helped the next family, and then helped the next family. And it was actually a cascading effect. So even if all we did was invest in one female founder, that company then helps the next company. If all we did was support one female investor, she invests in a couple of companies, those companies then go out into the world, and then we have a domino effect. So at the end of the day, if all we did was say, women are what, 52% of our population globally now, maybe a little bit more? That's half our population. If we're completely ignoring 50 some odd percent of the global population, we're missing out. I don't know why men don't necessarily have the reciprocating effect on our global economy, but they don't. I run a lending business out of Black Pearl. The default rate on male loans, and this is not just Black Pearl, this is across every single lending business. When you make loans into male-led businesses, the default rate's always higher. When you make loans into female-led businesses, the default rate is significantly lower. I have no idea why. There are lots of studies on this. So why should not we support those businesses who are better business bets? I have no idea why we continue to perpetuate women can't handle business. Women are better money managers. Every single empirical study shows us this. Every one of them. You can pull up any scientific journal over the last 20 years. They will tell you that. Every one of them. Racial studies have told us first-time fund managers have higher returns. Hedge fund managers that are minority-led have higher returns. All of them tell us this. So if we're trying to make an argument that says, hey, they're riskier, they're not. If we want to say these folks don't have the wherewithal because they didn't go to an Ivy League, it's not true. If we want to say they don't have the experience because they didn't go to a bigger firm, it's not true. Quantitatively, if we just want to say, oh, we want to make the highest return, you should probably have a woman fund manager, you should have a woman investor, you should have a minority investor, because frankly, the data shows you're much more likely to have much less risk and much more money returned. Every study tells us this at this point.
And as a matter of fact, speaking of studies, I'm going to be doing this throughout this session here. But according to research by Kauffman Fellows and the Kauffman Foundation, Diverse founding and executive teams generate higher median realized multiples on acquisitions and IPOs than all-white founding and executive teams. All right, 3.3 to 2.5 and 3.3 to 2.0 respectively. Also, First Round Capital found that its investments in companies with at least one female founder performed 63% better than its investments with all male founding teams. All right, so this is not a knock on guys. But what it is that we should be present to this notion of diversity. And diversity, and I like how you frame this, Kim, because I often think about diversity in these terms as well. It's not just about ethnic or racial or religious or even gender diversity. It's a diversity of ideas. I think that's the cultural paradigm, right, often informs how folks really, kind of think about the world, how they see the world, what their beliefs are based on. One last thing here. VCs that invest in people who look like themselves, and the data indicate that they do, this even hurts portfolio performance. Research by Harvard's Paul Gompers and another person whose name I don't want to butcher, finds that VCs that increase their proportion of female partner hires by 10% saw on average a 1.5% improvement in annual fund returns and a nearly 10% increase in profitable exits. So maybe that's a drop the mic moment. I don't know.
Well, I think when we talked earlier, women have to work so much harder to get the funding. So as you talked about defaults on loans, that there's data out there. Women are outperforming from an investor standpoint and returning a higher percentage of capital because women are in a place where they have to work that much harder to get an investment and to get follow-on funding from VCs. So when you're looking at a team, what the two of us would have to do as a founder versus you, Henry, would be very different as far as the funding that would come to males. And I see it as an investor all the time. Questions that are asked to female founders, investors are constantly asking, how are you going to mitigate these risks? Whereas if it's a male founder, it's how much of this market are you going to be able to take over and win, and they're setting males up for success, but female founders are getting asked all the negative. How are you going to deal with failure versus setting females up for success? So I feel as an investor, and as you talk about the diversity, women have always, the data shows, and we're all about data at Kinetic as well, that these women are not getting the same funding as males, and they're outperforming. So if you bring a female to a team, whether it's your company or you're an investor, you're seeing things, as I've said multiple times, through different lenses and bringing a different 52% of our population is females. We need to represent that in a company or from an investing standpoint.
Yeah, and oftentimes this seems like a zero-sum game, right? Where if we made investments in women-led or minority-led or people of color-led ventures that were, in some way or another, we're detracting from or taking away the opportunities for other folk to invest. How do we get out of this notion of this being a zero-sum game? I mean, how do we change the perception that it is a zero-sum game, and that by making these investments, by having representation on these firms, we're actually denying folks, rather than, in my sense, we ought to be thinking about expanding, that this is an expansion, not a zero-sum game. So I don't know if you can lean in on that at all.
Well, as I spoke earlier and have said, our process, we eliminate the bias because every company is treated the same. And I think we all want to be in this room treated the same. I want to be treated the same as my male partners at my VC firm. And I think we need to be more intentional to treat everyone equally, because just because I'm a female, I don't want a VC firm to invest in me. I want to be treated just like male founders and female founders, and I think we need to make an intention as a whole group in a country to diversify and treat everyone equal and give funding to the right founder regardless of religion, race, gender, and age.
Right, right. Well, I mean, that's aspirational, right? But there is a perception, right? And so what I'm trying to get at, and I don't know whether or not we can answer that in 5 minutes, but I'm trying to get at how do we pierce that perception, right? So that folks don't feel as though they're giving up something.
Well, they need to
Yeah.
give up something.
Okay.
I want to say the word I want to say, but
All right.
it's still morning, so I won't say
Okay.
the word I want to say.
We'll get into it.
It starts with an F and ends with a K. At the end of the day, change doesn't happen without people relinquishing the hold and the power that they had on things. Power, strangleholds don't come tumbling down without people giving up something. I think this notion that a power system, and let's make no mistakes about it, VC is a mythological bubble created by, it's nonsense. I mean, it is a game that is a nonsensical game. Frankly, most of it is, the VC world is, I am picking and hoping, and 100% of the things I pull into a portfolio, hopefully one of them is going to be an astronomical winner. So yes, 99 of them are losers, and they are going to be bomb losers. And I'm going to point fingers at one woman founder and go, I let you in, so, oh my God, you're keeping one other company out? It's garbage. No, it's not a zero-sum game, it's garbage. So yes, you're gonna have to give up your seat. If I let a woman found investor in, if I let another partner in, so what? Who cares that they didn't go to Harvard? You weren't that smart either. You got your job and you sucked. Somebody taught you, somebody let you in the door, and you came in and you were trash. Somebody gave you a chance. And I think we have to stop letting people pretend that they came in as king of the world. We have to stop pretending that these startups came into a portfolio with this golden shimmer. I can tell you, the unicorns didn't look like unicorns when they walked into a portfolio. We have to start pretending that the kingmakers started off as kingmakers. You get to tell your version of history after you are the historian. Yes, you will have to give up some power if you want things to change. Yes, that's how it works. I'm sorry. That's how it happens. That's it. One of the reasons I had to start my former firm is because there was not a single person who was willing to hire me. I have 5 degrees, 5. And I was told, you need to go back to school. Period. Why? Most of the people I was sitting across from was smarter than. Period. I wasn't going back to school. I started my own firm. Period. So I am not going to pretend hiring one more person into a firm with $100 million, they can afford it. They can hire 10 more people. I won't tiptoe around it and say, oh, you can hire them all, and it won't move the needle. You can invest in 10 more people. You can invest in 40 more firms. Like, at the end of the day, all of these conversations, I think we can choose to expand portfolios. I can't, I don't have enough money. Kim might. But I think the notion that we can actually change trajectories without people having to give up something is mythology. I think at the end of the day, all of us are pushing and pulling on our little part. There is a saying, if all of us do a little, no one has to do a lot, but some people will have to do a lot. Some people will have to give up something. Some people will have to give up a lot. Some people will have to retire. Some people will have to die in order for things to change. But I think there are a lot of people who look like me, who look like Kim, who are doing what Kim does. But at the end of the day, in order for VC to really change, there either sometimes will have to be a tremendous collapse in our industry, or people would just have to do something catastrophically different in order for there to be a change in the industry. And I see time is up, so I will shut up.
Well, thank you. There's a Frederick Douglass quote that I'll kind of paraphrase on that. Power does not concede without a struggle, right? So there it is. We're going to open this up to questions. I'm sure you guys are bubbling over with questions to ask, and yes.
Well, he used the microphone, so it's on. For later on when it's on with you. So thank you all for being here. Dr. Williams, you mentioned one word in your introduction, then it didn't come back up. Rural. I see the divide, especially in venture capital, urban, rural, as a pretty seismic gap. And also, Kim, I'm interested from Kinetic's standpoint, does geography play a role in the algorithms? Does urban versus rural play a role in the algorithms? If you could both touch on that.
Well, I'll just say, I think rural gets so overlooked. I mean, I think we almost feel like all good innovation happens in the city. I think when you have very few resources, that's where a lot of innovation happens. And I think we don't talk to people in rural areas, especially in North Carolina. We get to do a lot of work in Appalachia, especially in healthcare, and I see a lot of innovation there. So I get to spend a lot of time there, and I think we should spend more time really working with innovators in those areas.
Yeah, in the rural areas and for capital, you're in larger cities. Like we're all in Charlotte right now, but we had to build technology so founders in a rural community, they just need an internet connection and we can give them the funding they need. And if you look at probably the data from rural communities, this is important that they don't understand that there's access to accelerators and VC dollars or angel investors. So, I think it's very important to go to these underserved markets and provide capital to those founders because we have entrepreneurs everywhere, and you don't need to be in a city to be an entrepreneur that's building the next great company. And as we said, we can't predict who in this room is going to be a unicorn, whether you're in New York City or a small town in 3 hours outside of New York City in the state of New York. But being able to fund people in these rural communities, I think, is important as well as we talk about different aspects of getting funding to the founders to grow and scale a business.
Anyone else?
I scared everybody.
You didn't scare me. You energized me today, if anything. I'm curious, as a female founder and as an accredited investor myself, I often find even coming to this conference takes a lot of energy for me to show up, and I can literally count how many women of color, like on one hand, right? And there's this consistent, mental energy that I'm spending saying, is this a room that's safe? Is this a room that's going to welcome me? And I would love some advice on, does that ever go away? Or, and how do you make that, maybe spend less mental energy around it? But also when you feel like, and I'll say this, my business is around, empowering other women, and they're looking at me saying, oh my gosh, you're doing the thing that I'm scared to do. And so I often feel the pressure of, okay, well, I have to represent on behalf of all the women, all the Asians, all whatever people see me as, and it's tiring. So I would love your advice on any resilience.
I'm gonna steal a Drake line, nice for what? How I protect, it doesn't necessarily go away. There's a lot of mental energy. But I literally take that phrase, nice for what, to heart. Sometimes staying home is where you need to spend your time. You come out when you want to come out. You build your business how you want to build your business, but there is a freedom in expressing what you need to express, because those women that say you're doing everything I wish I could do, and you're saying everything I wish I could say, you can't say it day one. Dan, how long have we known each other?
12 years?
It's been a long time, right?
Over 10 years.
But also, how often have I not said everything, or it sounds like everything I wanted to say? Like, I'm pretty candid, right? That's through the filter. But at the same time, you always be political and strategic. But the protection for yourself is really in saying, I will always be honest with myself, because the last thing you want to do is not say something and damage yourself. There's a saying that says, if you're silent to keep the peace, you start a war within yourself. And you start a war within yourself, then that starts to destroy yourself. And you don't want that. So find your outlet. For me, my outlet generally is writing. And so a lot of times when I'm writing an article, I get to say what I need to say. But when you come into a room like this, make sure that you are vocalizing and expressing those thoughts. Don't take on the burden of trying to express or try to represent all women of color or all women of color investors, because that's not your goal. That's not your task. That's not a burden you need to carry. Express you, and I can tell you that expressing you will be enough, and I bet it probably vocalizes what a lot of people are feeling, including myself. And whoop, on being an accredited investor.
I think leading, and for all of us, it's a different way. But when you lead whatever in the way that's natural to you, people will follow. If we're trying to be someone that we're not, it's not going to be authentic. You're not going to have an impact. And the pressure that you have to be a female minority leader, when you are true to yourself, people are going to follow. You're going to set that example where people are going to recognize, wow, you've been able to accomplish this, and you'll impact other women. Like, I want to be like her, but we all lead in different ways. So be true to yourself and lead in a way that's genuine, and it will show.
What's the name of your business?
Crush your money goals. Crush your money goals.
I like it.
Yes.
This was insightful. Just had a question about post getting the check. Obviously, the journey to getting a check is amazing. You have a lot of enthusiasm. You get a lot of good advice. And post getting the check, then you're at scale and you're trying to figure out what's that next step based on the plan that you've kind of put together. You mentioned that founders will have to give up somewhat of or something to be able to get to that next position after when they've raised the capital. What advice would you give about of what you should give up and what you shouldn't give up as a part of that next step? Founders usually want to be more involved into some aspects of it, but sometimes there are gaps in what they can do and what they can deliver on. But that's where I would assume VC firms kind of help fill in that gap, and the conversation always goes, hey, we want to bring on this new person, or hey, we want to, take over this element, or this is the next step that we strategize on. So when does a founder say no, or when does a founder go back and gather more information, or how does that kind of relationship, kind of fold out based on, from you guys, what do you have to give up, and then what should I give up?
I would just encourage founders, especially a lot of the founders we end up working with, not to give up or try to not give up on your core mission. When you're vetting, and I do encourage founders to vet the VCs or the people you're taking money from, your mission, your why. Why are you starting this company? If it was to serve this particular purpose, when you're taking the money, understand where they're trying to drive the company. So if they are going to radically change the direction of your company, because to scale, you're going to have to go someplace different. Scaling changes really radically where you're going. So remember that. And if the mission is going to radically change, that's usually where there's a tussle. Now, if it's geographically, we're going into Georgia versus Florida first. Nah. But if it's the mission, that's where, sometimes it's worth maybe holding on to your mission or your core values. That's where I put up the most fight, or encourage you to really understand those parts and have them pinned down. That's where there's the most heartburn. Hires and, those hires, though, understanding those core values and the mission, to me, is where those are the things you hold sacred. What territories and that kind of a thing. Nah.
I think we're at time, or do we have more time?
We are at time.
We're at time.
We can let Kim answer, and then we'll.
Sure.
I was just going to say, well, as an investor, when you're saying how much do you want to give up of your company, you see companies all the time that think, this is my valuation. And you can spend months talking and meeting with potential investors. And you need that capital to scale your company. So, it's a standard across the industry, I would say. It's you can get a higher valuation and maybe find investors. But I think at the early stage, it's really important to get the capital to close on these investments and scale your business. And if you're going for this high valuation, it puts more pressure on you as a founder when you go to raise your next funding round if you haven't hit those numbers that you think when you're originally pitching your investors. It puts a lot of pressure on founders, and they don't think sometimes ahead. So, it's very important to think, what does this funding round look like? What does my next funding round look like? And investors, they're on this journey with you. We are just as much involved and want your company to succeed and realize like we're a team, and be realistic with what the terms are and how quickly you want to close a funding round. It's math that all VCs are going to do for multiples.
Oh, shoot, I totally answered the wrong question. Sorry.
So I'd actually like to close this up with something to say to those of you who are, in fact, VCs, right? A couple of things that came to mind, or rather that I ran across, that I think are important for you to consider when looking at investing in women and people of color founded ventures, right? So first and foremost, expand your network. Right? So you really need to get out and, interface and interact with more women founders and folks that are people of color. So, expand your network. Also increase the size of the prospect tent, right? Because, unless you do that, you're going to be leaving a lot of potential, really great opportunities on the table. Right? So you need to do that. And then also change the discussion paradigm, right? And what's meant by that is more often than not, when you're talking to a female or a person of color led founder, you're looking at what could go wrong rather than what could go right. So just sort of switch that notion around, right? So that you can really think about this possible investment as something that can yield a return rather than what are the marks, what are the negative marks that I can tick off with regards to this. Anyway, I could go on and on. I think we all could go on and on. I want to thank you all for your attentiveness and for leaning into this conversation. And have a great rest of the conference. Thank you very much.